Ich heiße Sie alle heute Abend sehr herzlich willkommen zum Architektur Tuesday. Mein Name ist Clara Grothkopf, ich vertrete heute Sabine Schmidt, die diese Reihe mit der Öffentlichkeitsarbeit der Fakultät organisiert. Nach einem sehr gut besuchten Auftakt letzte Woche mit Marc Angeville freuen wir uns jetzt, Sébastien Marot hier begrüßen zu können, der das Thema des Atelier die neuen Werkzeuge im Anthropozän aus einer etwas anderen Sicht heute nochmal beleuchten wird. Ganz kurz zu der Orga dieses Abends. Gleich werden Adria Larabal und Frederik Schnee eine kurze Erläuterung der Auswahl von Marot Ihnen geben. Im Anschluss wird eine unserer Masterstudierenden, Theresa Lefken, den Sprecher des heutigen Abends kurz vorstellen. Sie ist Mitglied im sogenannten Kollektiv Architektur Tuesday, eine Gruppe von Studierenden, die mit der Öffentlichkeitsarbeit zusammen diese Reihe jedes Semester hier an unserer Fakultät organisieren. Im Anschluss an den Vortrag wird es eine Diskussionsrunde geben, wo wir uns freuen, wenn Sie sich rege daran beteiligen. Der Vortrag wird in englischer Sprache stattfinden, genauso die Diskussion, nur dass Sie sich darüber jetzt nicht gleich wundern werden, denn Deutsch ist heute, das ist ungefähr der einzige Beitrag heute auf Deutsch. Worüber ich Sie noch informieren sollte, diese Reihe gibt ja auch immer die Möglichkeit, sogenannte Punkte bei der Architektenkammer zu bekommen als Fortbildung. Das ist auch dieses Mal wieder beantragt und wird in der Regel auch immer genehmigt. Wir haben nur noch leider keine Formulare, wo Sie sich eintragen können. Deshalb würden wir Sie bitten, sich in eine Liste einzutragen, die bei der Getränkeausgabe liegt, und wir werden sie dann weitergeben und dann werden Sie Ihre Punkte auch bekommen. Ansonsten wäre das meinerseits schon alles. Ich freue mich auf den heutigen Abend und bitte jetzt Adria Darabal und Frederik Schnee hierher, um inhaltlich vorzustellen, was heute Abend passieren wird.
Vielen Dank, Clara, für die Einführung. Vielen Dank an Sie, dass Sie heute Abend wieder zahlreich dabei sind. Wir freuen uns, Sébastien Marot heute Abend zu Gast zu haben. Für diejenigen, die vergangene Woche nicht dabei waren, ein paar kurze Worte zu der Reihe und die Absicht unseres Konzeptes zu den neuen Werkzeugen im Anthropozän. Wir stellen uns gemeinsam mit unseren Gästen die Frage, wie ein angemessener Umgang mit den Folgen unseres Tuns, unterschiedlicher Art des Tuns sein können. Als Architektinnen und Architekten erzeugen wir Handlungen, die große Auswirkungen haben auf das Aussehen und auf die Funktion unseres Planeten und unserer Umgebung. Vergangene Woche hatte Marc Angeville mit einem energischen das Thema Architektur und Technologie geprägt. Insofern wird es sehr interessant, heute das fortzusetzen mit Sébastien Marot, der sich, wie Frederik das gleich erläutern wird, auch einer Dualität widmet, aber in dem Fall einer anderen.
Ja, also Sébastien Marot haben wir eingeladen, weil er plädiert für eine Verschiebung des Architekturdiskurses hin zum Bewusstsein für ökologische Auswirkungen. Und seine Arbeit fordert eine Gewichtung auf die Verkettung von Architektur und Stadtplanung mit anderen Disziplinen wie Ökologie und Klimaforschung in Zeiten des Anthropozäns. Und Marot sieht den Diskurs zum Klimawandel als Chance für neue Formen der Zusammenarbeit und Dialog in der Architekturpraxis. Und in seinem Vortrag werden wir sicherlich sehen, dass er eine Skepsis gegenüber einer rein technologischen Lösungsorientierung hat und für eine kritische Reflexion über Ideologien und Werte in der Architektur plädiert. Jetzt wird Theresa nochmal kurz eine Pivita vorstellen.
Ich darf mich kurz selber vorstellen. Clara hat es eben schon ganz kurz übernommen. Ich bin Theresa Lefken, selbst Studentin hier im Master an der TH Köln und begleite dieses Semester gemeinsam mit ein paar Kommilitoninnen die Vortragsreihe vom Architecture Tuesday Neue Werkzeuge im Anthropozän. Ich stelle den heutigen Sprecher kurz auf Deutsch vor, der Vortrag gleich wird aber auf Englisch gehalten. Heute Abend haben wir Sébastien Marot zu Gast. Sébastien Marot ist einer der führenden Köpfe auf dem Gebiet der Landschaftsplanung und der Gestaltung des ländlichen Raums. Er studierte Philosophie und promovierte in Geschichte. Im Laufe seiner umfangreichen Forschungskarriere konzentrierte sich sein Interesse auf zeitgenössische Architekturtheorie und Stadt- und Landschaftsgestaltung, wobei er sich in letzter Zeit auf den ländlichen Raum konzentrierte. Derzeit ist er Professor an der École d'Architecture Paris und Gastprofessor an der École Polytechnique Fédérale in Lausanne sowie an der Harvard Graduate School of Design, an der er an einem Programm über die Konzeption und Gestaltung ländlicher Räume teilnimmt. Er war Generaldelegierter an der Société Française d'Architectes in Paris, wo er zahlreiche Vortragsreihen zur Geschichte der Architektur und Architekturtheorie organisierte und die Zeitschrift Le Visiteur ins Leben rief. Bis 2003 arbeitete er dort als Chefredakteur. 2010 gründete er die Zeitschrift Documents d'Architecture an der École d'Architecture de la Ville et des Territoires Paris, an der er derzeit als Professor für Umweltgeschichte lehrt. Er ist außerdem Autor zahlreicher Publikationen, die sich dem kritischen Denken über Urbanismus und Städte widmen. Hierzu gehören Suburbanism and the Art of Memory, das in mehreren Sprachen übersetzt wurde, sowie die Neuauflage des berühmten Manifests von Oswald Matthias Ungers und Rem Koolhaas, The City in the City, Berlin, ein grüner Archipel. In dieser Arbeit beschäftigt er sich seit Jahren mit der Frage nach der Stadt in der Ära des Anthropozän. Wie müssen ArchitektInnen und StadtplanerInnen über neue gebaute Räume mit dem Menschen als dominanten Faktor denken und welche Werkzeuge müssen entwickelt werden? Für die Biennale von Venedig 2014 arbeitete Sébastien Marot mit Rem Koolhaas an der Ausstellung Elements of Architecture. In der Ausstellung Taking the Countryside, die er 2019 für die Lissabonner Architekturtriennale kuratierte, dokumentiert er den Bruch zwischen Landwirtschaft und Urbanismus und schlägt eine nuancierte Perspektive auf das Leben im Anthropozän vor. Das Projekt wird seitdem an verschiedenen Orten gezeigt und ist derzeit in Marseille zu sehen. Zu diesem Thema publizierte er das Buch Taking the Countryside, Landwirtschaft und Architektur. So now I warmly welcome Sébastien Marot and give him the floor for his presentation.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So the subject that I'm going to address tonight is the one that we are working on since we put together this exhibition that you mentioned, that we prepared for the 2019 Lisbon Triennale of Architecture, which was called Taking the Countryside, Architecture, or let's say Agriculture and Architecture. So I realize I put a different title than the one that I gave to you, but it's always the same subject. I just play with different titles. And I chose this one that should be prepared for an urban exodus. As you mentioned, sorry. Yeah, for now 20 years, or yeah, more than 20 years actually. The main subject that I've been teaching in schools of architecture is the theory, but more the history of the environment. When I came back from the States in 2004 or 5, I decided that we had to address these issues. We had to welcome, in a way, the environmental issues and preoccupation, not just in the department of construction, you know, or here or there, or urbanism, for, you know, but just welcome them at the heart of the theory and history of architecture. These preoccupations have been there always in some ways. There has been a kind of long parenthesis where there was not that much there. And so it's not a very, very difficult exercise normally to welcome those issues really at the heart of.
Just check whether it gets a little bit louder here.
Okay.
Let's see.
So that's solved. Or is it worse? No. Okay, so of course you all know what I mean when I talk about environmental issues. We recently were very preoccupied with this one, but it was hiding in a way. Much bigger waves, coming up upon us today. So we have to address these issues. Like there is no choice today, and see what our disciplines can contribute to the elucidation of those big issues. So as you mentioned, it's been, during 10 years, I was teaching for Harvard in Rotterdam, in the office of the Office for Metropolitan Architecture that Referent has had to run for decades now, to the students who were involved with him in preparing exhibitions, basically. You might remember that Referent has decided, as soon as he was hired at Harvard, that he wouldn't teach studio, that he would do research, whatever that means. Research on different subjects, so research. Explaining that architects are usually asked to do this or that, and that was a fantastic occasion, just to decide on what kind of subject and topic you would work upon. So that's how I was not involved in this, I was just teaching the students theory and history of architecture, I was hired by Harvard, not by them. But of course, it was interesting for me to kind of link the subject I would address with the subject that the students were investigating. So when they were investigating the elements of architecture, Ren asked me, with all your stuff on energy and environment, couldn't you do something, on the hearth, the fireplace? That was fantastic. So we did a little research on the fireplace. But then, after that, that was in 2014, and then after that, he told me, come on, we're going to have we're going to do something incredible, an exhibition, a new exhibition, and I wanted to be very personal, he said at the beginning, very personal, and that was, what was it? The countryside. The countryside. And here, I must say that I was super interested in the topic, because for 20 years, as I told you, I've been teaching first-year students, wherever I teach, in Paris, in Lausanne, and so on, history of the environment. The idea was, at that time, environmental topics were, in a way, architects would be told, there's a new regulation on this or that, and you have to adapt to that, and it changes all the time, But instead of just receiving regulations, we thought it would be interesting that to make young architects be thinking and have a culture in all these domains, to know, if only, how to interpret what the regulations that were given to them. So, since I've been taught, I was a kind of self-educated in this domain. I'm not an historian, I studied philosophy. So, I'm not an historian, but I thought, well, we have to do it. So I kind of read a lot of stuff from everywhere. and trying to share that year after year with the students. And very soon, I had to be interested in agriculture, a neighbor of architecture, of course. You know, I'll explain why. But I could explain why right now. In a way, you know that we could say, it's a bit of a simplification, I know, but we could say that agriculture and architecture are twin activities. They were roughly born at the same time in our history, right? What we call the Neolithic moment, like 10,000 years ago for this area of the planet, a little less in others, you know, but okay, there is a Neolithic period where people started to domesticate animals, plants, and doing this started to domesticate themselves in territories with which they entered in a kind of co-evolution, right? In kind of permanent, more and more permanent structure. Of course, it's the hen and the egg, you know, the story of where they sedentary and then cultivated, domesticated, or did the domestication of plant animals like led them to be more and more sedentary. It's an autocatalytic process. We will not enter into that debate, but you know they are twin sisters in a way, those two disciplines. So when he told me in Bremen that he was going to go into the countryside, that was a subject. So we started to work together on his. I have a problem here. On his exhibition, which ended up being shown at the Guggenheim just 2 weeks before the pandemic. So it was not seen by many people at the Guggenheim. While I was working on what I described as a transatlantic footnote to his exhibition, because it was in Lisbon, and it was addressing another kind of issue, really centered on agriculture and architecture. I like, is it going to be like that? No. I very much like this photo by Joel Sternfeld. That was taken in 1976. It's part of a book that he published called American Prospects. Exactly. And I like it very much, this one, because in a way it sums up the situation of both architecture up there, you know, and agriculture. You know, with the fireman, you know, should be there, that kind of, it's a mess. It's a mess, you know. It's, I think Jacques Chirac, our president, back in during the Kyoto something that said, the house is burning and we're looking elsewhere. So it's really a fantastic, in a way, illustration of that thing. So we didn't have the Guggenheim, we had a blind parking lot. 2,000 square meters at the Centro Cultural do Belém in Lisbon, and a parking lot with its 2 rows of pillars. Where is this? Yeah, you know, in the center. Looks a bit like a basilica or a church in a way. So we organized the exhibition like that. In the nave, sort of a kind of introduction, purely visual introduction. In the nave, a very, very stuffy forest of panels, organized thematically in lines and chronologically within lines, of different moments, events, that you might want to have in the history of those 2 disciplines, that you might want to keep in mind when you are wondering how these 2 disciplines might evolve, and their relationship might evolve. Agriculture and architecture, cities and countryside, etc. So the first line was literally agriculture and architecture. The second line was agriculture and urbanism. The third line, which I did with my friend Mathieu Calam, an agronomist, was from agronomy to agroecology. The fourth line, we called it exit oops, a history of all those moments when people left cities. You all remember of probably the back to the land movement in the 70s, right? But it was not just that moment. I mean, you could say maybe that what we call the medieval period was a huge, I mean, for the first half, at least of those 1,000 years, a huge back to the land movement, leaving the urban infrastructure of the Roman Empire in a way, to go into custom, local custom, rural villages, fjords. So we could describe that whole period of our history as a big back to the land movement, followed, of course, by Renaissance. Okay, so that was so where we were. Exit rules. Then we straightened the chronology in the fifth line, which we call facing the environmental predicament. So we are basically after the Second World War, and even more into the 70s. Right? The limits to growth, the report to the Club of Rome, biologists, ringing alarms about survival, etc. Which is the context in which several very powerful alternative theories to the practice of industrial agriculture were formulated. Agroecology, and last but not least, permaculture. Permaculture, I have to tell you, I read the treatises of permaculture of the founders, maybe 1 or 2 years before I decided to do this exhibition, and especially the most important book of the theory of permaculture, this by David Holmgren, the Australian co-founder with Bill Mollison of permaculture, called Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability in 2000. This is one of the books, the 5, 6, or 7 most important books that I've read in my life, personally. It is a treatise of practical philosophy that is extremely deep and should be, I think, read by everyone. Okay, so, and the last theory was not a chronological one. It was trying to individuate the different lessons in design that architects, urbanists, landscape architects might find in permaculture and agroecological theories. It's not just things that they can catch into it. Of course, there is a transposition, of course, there is a translation that must be done. But I think there is a treasure trove of theory, of practical philosophy today, which lies in this knowledge. Along the way, so that was the nave, right? Then there was the big, wall there, 60 meters. You'll see an illustrated timeline of the history of the environment. It's basically my course for young architects in the history of the environment, drawn on the wall. It's great because now I can give it to students a kind of resume. You can't miss anything now. On the other side, because nothing is more exciting than actually talking to those guys who are actively involved in transforming thoughts and ways of doing, we had like 5 chapels with films, documentaries. If you wanted to see everything, you had to have a tent and live there. There was probably 10 hours interviews with David Holmgren and many other guys, so it's there. And finally, the choir here, and I will concentrate a bit on that today. We designed a kind of compass, a wind rose, to try to see, to reflect on where is that going now? Where is it going? Where are we going in the relationship between cities and countryside, between architecture and agriculture, urbanism and where are we going? It's difficult to see. So it was inviting the visitors to wonder where should we go? Sorry. Okay, so now we go. So I'm not going, of course, I can't show you much of this because it's like very stuffy. But this is how it looked in Lisbon, So all these series of panels, and you see in the back, because it was too stuffy on the recto, on the verso, we just put images that are normally well known by architects, and we didn't put them chronologically, just because of resonance with the panels that were in front or in the back. So let visitors strip and think, of that project. I like to compare it, when I did it, I like to compare it to a kind of, a deck of cards, when you play a patience, patience, when you put, your card, where should I put this one, etc., and you engage in a way the visitor to play with the hypertext between these things. Okay. It's a pain to have to. Okay, this was in Lausanne. Same. So I'm not very happy with the kind of image that I put into this lecture, so I'll see whether I skip them or not, right? But I just want to show you a few things. This is a very important panel, A2, first line, second panel. Important, it's my captatio benevolentiae for architects, to just convince architects that yes, it's an interesting subject. Because, of course, the Doric temple, no architect in Western Europe denies that that's architecture. That's not really architecture. Okay. But what is a Doric temple? Why is a Doric temple built like that? So, of course, you all architects or students in architecture have been told by Vitruvius, by Choisy, etc. That's the Doric temple, and by the way, all the temples, where monumentalization in stone of a public building that used to be built in wood, etc. And hence the columns, hence the frieze, with the triglyphs, Vitruvius saying that's the end of beams, etc. Okay, but really, a German architect, Georg Peschken, who many of you know, I guess. Georg Peschken proposed an alternative theory. He was not exactly the first to do it, but he did it very well. By saying, well, a Doric temple looks very much like a kind of building that existed either in stone or in wood, from Ukraine to Galice to everywhere, which is a very functional building, which is the granary. A granary, place where you keep the grain. Right? This is very functional. You need, of course, it needs to be put out of the mud of water. Hence, it's super elevated. You need to avoid pests. Hence, the capitals. Right? In the Doric version, it's just by gravity, right? I've seen the only examples today in Switzerland where people put, linen, where they put repulsives, in it. So, and you have to be only an architect, and strictly an architect, to ignore that Einfluss is a very well repulsive. And then, of course, he suggests the triglyphs are maybe not very convincing as endless beams, but maybe more convincing as the symbols of ventilation, apertures, because you need absolutely to ventilate the thing. That's interesting. Or you tell me, oh yeah, but the temple is not the ground. But that's the point. That's exactly the point. When the Greeks started to build this kind of stuff, the temple, like 6th century BC, maybe a little before, is exactly the time when Greek agriculture specialized into the vine and olive, into commercial agriculture, and started to depend on very different, not far away regions that they submitted, like the Garietis, who have to hold the temple, for the provision of essential needs. So it's not rare that at the very moment when you know that you're not respecting the true values of provision, of autonomy, of independence, you sublimate them into temple architecture, religion, or everything. That's the hypothesis. So that's the way to try to convince an architect that it's a good subject. Okay, behind, of course, the image behind this panel, which shows that page of Le Corbusier there in architecture. We could have chosen Gropius, showing, the silos, as the example of the machine, the example of the industrial life. The good example that should be imitated, functionalist architecture today. Not not just to have. This is the only time that I will give you the reason why we put the image behind. You have to go to the exhibition and wonder why for all the others. Okay. What's another panel? A5. No time. Since we're in Germany, A6. Very interesting example of a landscape architect who strongly linked the issue of horticulture and agriculture with city planning and architecture. Maybe one of the most incredible dialectic between those two things. Not just a garden city, die Versiegelung is almost a garden that becomes a city, that is the spine of the city. The walls grow, palisade trees becoming, the backbone, in a way, of the construction of the city, and its extension, etc. Just, I don't have time to enter, you will understand. There are 50 like that. We can't do that. This one I might say just a second. It's B2. B2 is called Mundus. As students or past students in architecture, we were all told, that how a Roman city was planned. Joseph Egbert, in The Idea of the Town, wonderfully explained all the rituals of the foundations of cities. So how they trace the pomerium around the city, with two oxes pulling a plow, how they delineated the area of the temple, how they traced the cardinal and the decumanus, etc. But there was another ritual that Egbert deals a lot with, called the ritual of the mundus. The ritual of the mundus consisted in digging a kind of pit somewhere in the center of the city, of the future city, where colonists, when it was a city of colonists created, would throw a handful of earth from their old regions. And since every ritual of foundation was a ritual of refoundation, or each year they would throw fruits from the different fields that they had, just outside the city, in that same melting pot, you could say. It was very important because it was when the mundus was inaugurated that the city was given its name. So it was called the Umbicus Urbis, the nave of the city. So you have to imagine that a Roman city is not just the cross of the Gallo and the Decumanus, but that you have a vertical axis, which is in a way sketched by this one, between the Orbi and Ubi, the earth and somehow. And if you start a kind of thinking about that, you say, okay, this is the mundus, the Roman mundus. This is Piazza del Campo in Siena. This wonderful, shell, Greek shell like that, with 9 quarters, because there are 9 neighborhoods in the city, 9 governors in the city here, etc. Each separated by a drainage with the Fontana di Gaia, which is here. It's part of the design of the piazza in the 14th century. So I cannot help at least seeing that as a kind of emblematic map of the agricultural territory of Siena, a miniature, in a way, Landschaft, of all these things, interpreted as a kind of the people, with all the drainage system, all the things of that. Then, Central Park. Central Park also plays that kind of role, much later, but you can see that this stretch of fabricated wilderness in the center of the city is a kind of metaphor of a much wider territory, the kind of landscape that the colonists would have found before they did this thing, so a huge region. And then contrasts with what I would put in French, son flair de chienne de traîneau. When he identifies the park, it's a globe within the grid. So you see here a kind of history of the globalization of the world itself. There were worlds before, that world, that world, that world, and now there is only one. That's very bizarre. Okay. Von Thünen, his model of the ideal state, early 19th century, isolated state. This is a kind of description of how a territory before the consequence of the Industrial Revolution basically functioned. A city in the middle where you exchange goods, and then several circles according to the kind of care that all the cultivation need. So just by the city vegetable gardens, they need a lot of things. Also the perishable goods like milk or things like that. Then wood, you need wood. There is not yet oil and things. It's heavy, cannot be very far. Then, of course, intensive cultivation of cereals, less intensive mixed with animals, and then only animals. Animals are heavy, but they can walk. And of course, this was not taking into account the topography, the different fertility of the ground, and etc. That complicates any real situation. But this is a pretty valuable portrait of how agrarian territories used to function before the Industrial Revolution. What was the Industrial Revolution? It was a revolution in the use of dense energy, all of a sudden, and a revolution in transportation. Hence, with the Industrial Revolution, each region didn't have any more to worry about cultivating everything it needed. You know, it was specializing on its comparative advantage, etc. So, inaugurating a kind of vast market of spaces and goods linked to the different conditions of these different spaces. Okay. Yeah, just this one. Maybe I'll consider urbanism. If we think about the moment when the concept of urbanism surfaces, it's basically mid-19th century, and it will really become a word by itself early 20th century. But with Serra, with all the urbanism is almost there, right? So if you are aware of that very moment when the term surfaces, then it doesn't so much designate the art of creating cities as the art of managing the incredible growth of cities caused by the Industrial Revolution, the rural exodus toward metropolises. And then you can, François Choet, a great historian of urbanism, 100 years after, in the 1960s, said there is basically three schools of urbanism. She called them the progressists, the culturalists, and the naturalists. If you keep in mind, I would use those three terms as you do, but reinterpreting in the light of the fact that urbanism is, let's say, the discipline that manages the growth of cities. The progressists, let's say, for instance, the modernists, like Le Corbusier and others, their view on the problem was that this growth was so big, so fast, that there was a change in nature. Modern city was not the ancient city, was another thing. And it had to be, so what made the city was the program of the modern city. You have to understand it well, differentiate all its function, make it work perfectly. So what had to guide the extension of cities was the ideal program of the modern city. The culturalists, they said, no, come on. You must not forget that there is an original city that is Rome, right? And it has a DNA. It has a kind of syntax, you know. And what should inspire the extension of cities is that DNA, those syntaxes, those things. Cité and all this tradition. And then there was the naturalists. And François Choet identified only one in her book. It was enough for her to make it. It was Frank Lloyd Wright, Broadacre City. I would actually not use Frank Lloyd Wright as a representative of that third naturalist movement, but rather people like Frederick Law Olmsted, the creator of Central Park, the guy who organized the growth of American cities around park systems that became the spine of these extensions. The naturalists, they come and they say, no, what should guide the extension of cities is the actual territory on which that extension is happening. Its hydrography, its topography, etc. That should be the substrate that informs the building, the extension, and hence the building of cities. And I would add, within maybe that last movement, a kind of radicalization naturalist tendency, which I would call regionalism. Patrick Gillis, people like that, Lewis Mumford, for instance, said it's so true, the naturalist view on cities, that the real subject of urbanism is not the city proper only, but the watershed, the region, that provided, what it means. Today, as you know, this idea is resurfacing under the name of bioregionalism. Right? How could we find a better correspondence between the governance of societies and the metabolism of territories, particularly around the idea of watershed? You tell me, yeah, watershed is like Russian puppets, so where do you start? And that's the question. Okay. Yeah, that's the wonderful image by Patrick Gillis, superimposing a section of the watershed, right? Identifying all the different activities, mining, gold mining, forestry, etc., up to fishing, in a way, superimposing to a section of the city which should be located somewhere here, where the energy flows, in a way, with all the industries of transformation, all these stuff there. It's a kind of summary, in a way, of the bioregionalist agenda. How much more time do I have? What, 20 minutes? 20 minutes? Okay. So I'll pass that. These are a few things in the section on agronomy and the industrialization of agriculture. Yeah, maybe this panel. In a way, we could say that the 19th century was the century of the industrialization of manufacturing, and everything. And that the 20th century was the century of the industrialization of everything else, and especially agriculture, which was in a way the last sector of the economy to be fully, but then big time, industrialized, mainly after the two world wars. To the point that you could say that in a way, the industrialization of agriculture historically worked as a of the industry of war. The Haber-Bosch system identified before the First World War, but too energy intensive, and of course it was about the same process to make explosives so everybody went into it, and then recycled the thing into agriculture. Tractors, tanks, tractors, barbed wires used everywhere, recycled into agriculture. Even the industry of the distribution of food was experimented, as a way to provide the front, canned stuff. There was an incredible, anyway. So, yeah, herbicides, pesticides, also Haber-Bosch. They were experimented on humans before being experimented on animals. Herbicides, that's more American, the way the rice paddies of Japan in the Second World War were completely destroyed then, and then used after. Okay. So I'll bring you the dream, of Get Big or Get Smart. This is not a caricature by people saying, how bad. No, it's a dream of an industrial agriculture that would actually recycle, everything. That would be an absolutely perfect cycle, metabolism. industrialized. Of course, other discourses by the founders of biodynamism, organic agriculture, like Albert Howard, and the great phrase was, you know, Gebes goes to India as the envoyé of the British Empire to reorganize the urbanism of Indian cities. And he arrives there and he says, well, it's really interesting what you do, you know, and maybe we should inspire ourselves from all these lessons. You know. At about the same time, Albert Howard, a great agronomist, is also sent to Indore, India, with the mission of modernizing, in a way, the agriculture there. Right? Not only, but also. And he discovered, they know what composting is about. You know, maybe we should learn a lot of things there. And hence, organic agriculture comes from the contact of Albert Howard with the organic farmers of China, of India, of everything. There are lots of books from agronomists in the early 20th century who talk about permanent agriculture. An agriculture that would cultivate the soil, not just the plants, right? That would cultivate the patrimonium, which is the soil there. Okay. This is the part on exit groups with the great figures that advocated when urbanism was launched and was a discipline early 20th century. Farmer who taught, specialist of horticulture, who founded the mecca of American agronomy, which is Cornell University, created a department of ruralism. That was landscape architecture, was called ruralism. He said, very good urbanism, but you're treating the problem at the end, the consequences. You're not treating the problem at the source, right? Why people are leaving land there, because, you know, so there should be a discipline that tries to attach, in a way, people to the rural backgrounds. That would be at least a necessary complement to urbanism. Anyway, so you see the kind of panels that we have there. In that same series, the Back to the Land movement in the 70s, you know, I love that they had, you know, that workers disperse. That's the contrary of the first sentence of Marx and Engels' manifesto, you know, disperse, that you would have a much better chance to have the system collapse if you just leave. You know, among many permaculturists, the same idea is exactly there. Okay. When I read the first book published that founded the concept of permaculture, published in 1978, same year as the Daily New York, by an old guy, a 50-year-old man, professor of environmental psychology in Tasmania, self-made environmentalist, etc., and a very young guy who is writing as his bachelor thesis what is going to become permaculture 1, David Conway. And they mention an architect as having been a very important source of inspiration for them. And I've been among architects for about 3 decades, and I have never heard that name. Colin Moorcraft. Do you know Colin Moorcraft? As I discovered, that guy was 25 in 1972. He was still a student at the Architectural Association with Rembrandt, but in a different area. He was a kind of voracious reader of ecology and everything. And he even was the editor of a special issue of architectural design called Designing for Survival, the year of the Limits to Growth report. And his text is very long, very stuffy, very good text, in which he criticized very strongly the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was that whole policy, to export to the third world countries industrial agriculture, industrial techniques, cultivation everywhere, explaining that it produced rural exodus, loss of knowledge, etc. And he ends his text by a paragraph called Beyond Industrial Technology, in which he says, well, a post-industrial technology should have three virtues. Three. One is integration. That is what we understand as recycling. Limiting influence, limiting excellence, having a metabolism that runs not completely, but reuses, etc. Second virtue, flexibility. That means, he says, system that should be conceivable, repairable, adaptable by its own users. Not a black box, that dictates to you its mode of operation and what you're going to do in agriculture, huge machines, structures that you don't know how they work. You cannot repair them. You go into debt for 3 decades, so you're completely tied to them. Okay, so it should be a technological system that should be repairable, adaptable, conceivable in a reasonable range of scale, right? Community, large community scale. And 3, that's the most important, they should be cooperative systems. And by this he means this should be systems in which each element fulfills several functions, and each function is fulfilled by several elements. So the model is not at all that of, let's say, functionalism, the historical functionalism, the machine, where each element fulfills super efficiently one function, right? And each function is fulfilled by another. No, the model is the ecosystem and its resilience, where indeed each element fulfills several functions. So it's a kind of alter functionalism. It has to, it's a functionalism, but with a very different model of what the function is about. So, in a way, you could say that permaculture is the exact translation of those 3 principles in the field of productive gardening and managing and designing of productive sites. So it's interesting that it comes, in a way, some architects, completely forgotten nowadays, helped formulating the concept of that design, practical design philosophy, which permaculture is. Okay, you see. You'll have to go see the exhibition or have the exhibition come to you so you can plant your tent in it. That's the last section where we kind of try to identify some of the lessons that we can find in permaculture. Radical site specificity. One of the basic things in permaculture is that you don't do nothing of any importance on the site before you live there at least 1 year to see, to understand how it works or everything. Nothing before. There is no. It always comes from the site. Another one is, the staging, the projecting in section the site. The way you could say that it's volumetric agriculture or horticulture, from the underground to the canopy. There's many layers there, So it's in a way, it's more interesting than architecture. See what I mean? Three-dimensional, because then there is the fourth dimension, the seasons, the thing, much more complex than architecture. Very, the thing. So you should be interested. Your next step is programming. Okay. Yeah. Just to illustrate, each element would be several functions. A hen is an element, right? And a hen has not as a unique function to hatch eggs. It does, but it also scratches the earth. It also shits and then helps, the things. It provides warmth. It needs also warmth and love, and etc. So if you take into account all the service that it can provide, but also all its needs, then inserting it in the system is much more complicated than other. You see what I mean? It's like a super complex system, and a living one, by the way. Okay, so yeah, we added in Marseille a new section on bioresonantism. This is the last panel, meant to give you hope, with the Chiapas rebellion, where a territory which is the size of Belgium or Britain managed to obtain from the Mexican state, not simple, but to a kind of auto-organization, auto-policy, and functions for now 30 years with the promoters de salud, de educación, politicians without money on that territory. It's, I think, the best existing today. And it's, it fills me with hope. Okay, so I go to the last, so that's our timeline, you see, in different issues. So from the Paleolithic, you can see 16 meters from the Paleolithic to today. So a few sections that are of interest for architects. And then up to the great acceleration, right? And this section where we summarize it. In the center, urbanization. That is growing both in density and in extension. Surrounded by all kinds of problems. Lack of capacity, erosion of soils, biodiversity collapse and climate change, and also a whole bunch of problems linked to vanishing stocks of non-renewable resources, not only energy, fossil energy, but all kinds of materials, metals, rare earth, all the things into which the Industrial Revolution extracted more and more, and which were the condition of its development. Right? So, okay. Oh yeah, and in the middle, yes, in the middle I put rental houses up there. Right? In a way, he's been the advocate of metropolitan, of concentration of population in huge metropolises. You remember the years ago? It's exactly about that, right? Even before the years ago. With Exodus. That was a kind of radicalization of the idea of the rural exodus. An exodus within a super dense metropolis. Right? And that would be, in a way, the solution to what and today you have the line. Direct inheritance from there. concentration. In Deleuze, New York, if you read it well, remember it was published in 1978. That is that very decay of environmental issues, with the oil shocks, etc. You remember that he advocated metropolitan architecture against what he calls the lack of everything, reality shortage, not oil shortage. He generalized, the big problem of that time, which was oil shortage, to the shortage of everything, the big. And in a way, the metropolitan architecture and metropolitan urbanism that he advocates is the equivalent in urbanism of the nuclear plant in energy production. Right? A super generator. Remember that. So Deleuze is a kind of environmental strategy, but a certain kind of environmental strategy that sees the horizon in more and more density and concentration of population. At the time, others were hesitating between different kinds of work. Those with big energy plants, etc., and another world there. This is from Radical Technology book. In a way, what we try to do with this exhibition is to help people go through a very, very troubling situation, which is ours today. Which is when we look back at the past, yes, it seems as if the urbanization of the world is something, inevitable and integral to history. And the most official statistics tell you we passed the 50% people urban in 2008. In 2050, we became almost 70%, etc. It seems that it's a kind of inevitable stuff. At least when you look at the 2.5 centuries of the industrial era. But at the same time, so I know it's more difficult, when probing the future and looking at the environment, at the environmental issues that are looming there, which we try to sum up in our drawing, this same global urbanization looks rather improbable, impossible, and like the end of history. So, how are we to deal with a situation that looks both inevitable and impossible? That's a bad situation, Something which is both inevitable and impossible. I mean, it kind of describes, the schizophrenia we're all into nowadays. So to help, I'll pass that. Yeah. David Holmgren in 2008 published a very little book called Future Scenario, which I think is absolutely essential. I translated it in French recently. What does he do in this book? He says, basically, we have two kinds of problems at the same time. One that he calls global warming, which can be slow, benign, or violent and rapid. You don't know exactly where you are on that gradient, on that vector. Each time the IPCC publishes a report, we're a bit higher on that vector. But you could add to global warming biodiversity, erosion or collapse, water scarcity, erosions of soil. That is, this arrow is that of the progressive degradation of the conditions of life on our planet. Okay? Which can be slow, or it can be violent and brutal. But there's another kind of problem at the same time, which he calls oil flooding. But here also you could add gas, of course, other fossil fuels, uranium, etc. You could add metals, rare earth, all the stuff that have made humanity a very powerful force in transforming the world around it. Right? And this is going to go down. You don't know when exactly, no, but you know, because it's non-renewable, basically, resources. Already oil, we know that conventional oil, 2008, you know, that of course we had bituminous sand and everything, but they are peaking also now. So it's going to go down, slow. If you cross those two things, then you obtain 4 quadrants with 4 different kinds of scenarios. First scenario, destructive degradation of the conditions of life on our planet, climate change, stuff like that. But you still have power. You still have a lot of metals, a lot of rare earth, a lot of oil, and etc. So you have power. So for instance, if you have the sea level, you build huge dams. You have the power to do that. David calls that scenario ground deck. You get out sooner or later of the markets, etc. You have a convergence of its fascism, basically. Conversion of the power of states and the power of huge enterprises that can mobilize power. That's basically the definition of fascism by Mussolini. That's the first. It's China 3.0. Just an example. Second scenario, green tech. That's the better indicator. Slow oil decline, slow degradation of the conditions of life. You still have power to prepare for the future. So you deploy wind turbines at an industrial level, you build solar concentration stuff, you go into all this stuff. In the first one, with Elon Musk, you prepare to go on Mars. Here, it's more, other stuff. Okay, that's a green tech, that scenario. We sometimes think we're still there. We hope we're still there. That we are going to delay, the things by preparing a kind of stability, Third, quadrants. It's still okay in terms of climate change, but energy descent and material descent. So that's basically exactly the reverse scenario than the one that produced the Industrial Revolution and this one. That is, energy you have now to cultivate it, right? You have to, in the form of living organism. So no more rural exodus. On the contrary, you have an urban exodus, where not 2% of the population is going to cultivate. It's like 50, maybe 60% will do that, and maybe some other things also together, right? So you leave the metropolis. That's a kind of medieval, happy medieval. Because there is the other one, the one of the survivalists, where you have both a serious degradation of the conditions of life and deep growth, etc. So there is no world war. You don't do world war without power, but it's still a bit Mad Max situation. Right? It's foil stuff there. Okay. David Holmgren's idea is that the best way to prepare all these scenarios is to actively prepare this one, hoping that you will get it. Second idea is that, of course, these scenarios are defined by different material conditions, but they are not exclusive of one another. First, because all the regions in the world are not in the same situation. For instance, Australia is plenty of fossil energy left there, But it's like climate change is like striking hard there. So he wrote another text called Welcome to the Brown Tech. And actually, the pandemic, the way they dealt with the pandemic was kind of more than China. Anyway. And the second thing, New Zealand is, for instance, in a completely different situation. Less fossil things and still okay, in terms of climate and biodiversity. So it's a different situation. But they can also be like Russian puppets into one another, because they also depend on the number of people who believe that they should prepare for this one, actively, so they exist everywhere. Even an individual, maybe you will recognize yourself. Maybe even an individual, this is going by David, at the scale of the domestic scale, will be in a kind of survivalist philosophy. We economize everything, we don't matter. Then at the community level, association, Then at the professional level, the couple will work in solar engineering or wind turbine generating or that kind of stuff. Right? And then when it's time to vote, you want a state that protects you from any kind of thing. You see what I mean? So they are all happening together. So in a way, what we did in the exhibition at the end, the choir, is a kind of exercise in that field. I was tired of hearing the word urban agriculture. I was tired by this thing because I never knew what it exactly meant. And I could see very different narratives and discourse being sold as urban agriculture. So that's what philosophers do. They kind of propose distinctions, right? And they even caricature the different orientations. So there is a first discourse, which is an environmental discourse, which I call incorporation. Incorporation here means not only that the metropolis incorporates, agriculture, but that it becomes, in a way, the control tower of all the productive territories. So it's like, you see, we, with Martin Etienne, no, that's not it. So buildings that grow food, to reduce the distance between consumers and producers. Many architectural design reviews are full of those kinds of stuff. High-tech things, high-tech agriculture. We even put Elon Musk Hyperloop here, link this thing. Of course, you need this, You need a lot of dense power to activate all this stuff. So you see what I mean. Then you have a slightly different one. By the way, Stuart Brown, who was the great creator of the Whole Earth magazine, that said, workers of the world dispersed. 20 years after, he said, I was wrong. I was really a mistake, because the climate change problem is so big in scale that we need powerful responses, right? So what are these responses? Basically, concentration. Population, concentration in very dense metropolises. Even slums, they will do less kids. You concentrate them. You minimize their footprint. Then food, GMOs. GMOs, they will always have in advance on nature's horrible tendency to disappoint expectations, right? GMOs, genetically modified organisms. So yeah, it's and power, nuclear, because the wastes are concentrated, are not diffused, right? They're very dangerous, but we know where they are. So, and that, if that is not enough, geoengineering. So basically, he said that. Okay. Second direction, so that was north. Now east, negotiation. Negotiation, yeah, agriculture becomes an integral component of urban extension. So that is the kind of narrative that says, yes, cities are going to continue to grow. It's inevitable. It's the urbanization of the world. But they are going to become hybrid. They are going to integrate as elements of their program horticulture, forestry, everything. They will do agro-quartier or things like that. So, and that is very powerful in architectural circles. This, in a way, you could call that direction not urban agriculture, but agricultural urbanism. See? Comes from the urban, right, and it colonizes in a way. Its Broadacre city is a big, that's right. Okay, then infiltration. That is, for me, urban agriculture proper. That is, existing cities are permeated by initiatives of horticulture that go on roofs, that create commons and paved plots, that goes on retaining walls everywhere. It is acupunctural. It can be helped by the government, etc. But it's acupunctural. But it can be also massive. Think of Detroit after the fall of the auto industry, all of a sudden. Think of La Havana, Cuba, during the special period where, the fall of the Soviet Union, no more importation. They became the mecca of permaculture for 10 years. It's unfortunately finished. But it was incredible there. It's also all those urbanites who weave links with producers in the countryside, etc. The AMA, all these systems like that. And finally, there is another direction, which I call secession. Not the opposite of the first one, the real opposite of the first one. People, for political or more for health, for community reasons, even if they are still in the orbit of metropolises, decide to put all their investment into becoming, at the community scale, more autonomous for basic needs. Most of the serious permaculture people are clearly into that, like many others. So, becoming autonomous, becoming more autonomous at the domestic, but certainly at the community or micro-community level. And it's the same as with David Holmgren. They are not exclusive of one another, those different directions, which are caricatured here. They are actually all happening at the same time. Right? But of course, it's very different. They are based on very, very different narratives of the reason why we are in this environmental mess today. Right? Something that the technology is going to take them out, the flight forward. Never we could solve the problems caused by an industrial revolution except by another one. And other things that they have to stop the machine. More or less violently. So I'll end with a question. What is a world? This is the big question that I ask myself. We should probably consider that we live in worlds and not in the world. We're not citizens of the world. I mean, at least you can be a citizen of the world, provided that you take care of a world somewhere, and actively take care of that world. So I found a kind of provisional answer to that question, which is the following. A world is a territory, a region, a country where one could reasonably imagine to project and spend one's entire existence. I'll leave you with that. Thank you for your attention. Yes. There was a book. I can't find it anymore. It's out of print. But there's a website where you can find everything I said plus all the rest directly online. Thank you. It's horribly late though. Sure.
Thank you, Sébastien Marot, very much for a very severe and still hopeful reflection on the world. What is the world? I've been wondering about one notion which kept an issue very related to the Industrial Revolution, which you name as one of the most relevant points in time to define our state of mind today. We spoke, or you spoke, better said, about agriculture, technology, and architecture, and also about this convolute words, architecture, and so on. I was wondering about the term nature, and with one reason, because recently, and preparing for something else, I came across a book from Timothy Norton called Ecology Without Nature. And he made a point which I found very interesting about the idea of the notion of nature being defined and used. He was speaking in this context about John Ruskin as one of the first environmentalists. And taking him as an example for a view on the idea of nature as a duality, or seen as a part of a duality, nature and a culture, humankind, or human systems and earth systems. And he was pointing on the idea of the term nature being used by also discourses beyond the Industrial Revolution, which made it possible that we misused nature in the way we do. So the notion was used in the same way. And yes, I would like to start by asking how you see this very notion.
I avoid this kind of debates. Really avoid these debates. Timothy Norton actually seems to me a bit caricatural in this way. Bruno Latour was lately saying the same thing in a much more efficient way already, when, yes, he was describing as naturalism the kind of ethos of this part of the world, the Western world, based on a kind of opposition and differentiation. There is a line between what is culture, what is nature. And all his work has been about showing that this line, in fact, doesn't exist. that in fact, ecological and environmental issues, we are like mixing human, non-human stuff. But he ended up in his first work saying, yes, we should not use the word nature because it's too loaded by this. We should use the term the collective of humans and non-humans, debating, comparing as if we were in a political assembly, where of course there's only humans in the assembly. But some are advocates of the wolves. They say, well, the wolf is not very happy in our collective, he feels excluded, he would like to, etc. Then, of course, you have a representative of the shepherd who say, well, maybe, but maybe not, etc. Another would say, the river would like to, divert, etc. So he was kind of saying, because, and the difference is big, because nature feels like if it was something behind us, while the collective is both behind and in front of us. It's a design, it's design. So architects are very happy with what do. It always puts, nature as it becomes a project. I avoid these things because I think we have more urgent problems than these problems of terms. That's why I use the word environment also. Many people tell me, philosophers, that you can't use the environment and environment goes through use all the okay. But use the word that we have at hand. Nature is fine. Isabel Schreers is a very strong advocate of keeping the word nature with us. It's there.
If I may, I would just continue by one. I agree, and also thank you for pointing again on the urgency, say concentrating and maybe not wasting time on definitions. But still, the reason I started by that is because I'm wondering under which state of mind or attitude we can start using actually working upon what you have shown us in our direct field of action. You were telling us also before we directly met that it is not an issue about telling architects what to do, your exhibition or also your publications, but still, if we would start to try to put these questions of or this solution between in means of teaching. I was searching for the way to start and maybe the right word. That's why I came to question about the notions you are working with. And fair enough, nature is too complicated or maybe too religiously used. But still, is it a solution to compose this idea of an architecture transformed or seen through the eyes of agriculture and then use it as architecture? And to put it in a picture, would we be starting now teaching architecture?
It's an interesting one. I didn't delve into that. Architecture, as far as I know, this is the panel that we had about, is about a guy and a French mason from Lyon who came up to Paris just before the French Revolution with the idea of instituting him professor of rural architecture, saying architects are not interested in rural buildings, etc. They are wrong. There's a whole knowledge there, and this knowledge is both at the hand of builders and of farmers. And his ideal was to, in a way, mix the knowledge of the farmer and the living things with that of the builder together. And for that, he coined the term agri-tech. But then bizarre thing is that this term has been recently reinvented, completely without knowing, but on the West Coast in the States, by the ecological modernists, who say we should do buildings that grow food. So typically, those towers, the things like, for instance, NPR in this big city, or things like that. So it's completely different. I think it would be interesting to teach architecture in the first semester. That's my opinion, rather than the second.
Was it also the control you were mentioning?
Control.
Maybe following, thank you very much. And, I think you're interested in culture, architects, and you followed on the history of environment and agriculture. Maybe there's no answer to it, but how can architects and city planners create a new kind of urban ecology that focuses on resilience, and sustainability? In regards, you have the terms like geography, topography, territory. Maybe you can talk on this.
Maybe.
Maybe you have those terms, concentration, infiltration, but there's four options. So
Yeah.
which direction should we go?
Oh, you go where you like. I mean, of course, in the book, I explain myself that I feel more, I tend toward secession and infiltration. I will say that I tolerate negotiation, knowing that it can be an argument to do more of the same. And I have an innate diffidence against incorporation. But that's my problem. And I don't think I caricature them. I mean, I caricature in the sense that I want them to be fully understood rapidly, it's a caricature. But I think they all have a part of truth. In French we say that, une part de vérité. They all have a part of truth. How do you say that in German? But of course, so they have a part of truth. Then you enter the compass and you wonder, where would I wish to go and the world to go? Where would I locate myself into that compass or wind road? Where I feel that I want to go towards secession, and I have to fly.
So there's some kind of tendency of land movement, so like urban access nowadays. And the question is now, like, what kind of situation would we be if there was no pandemic, for example? Which kind of impact had it
on that movement?
Yeah, well, of course, your thoughts.
Yeah, of course, the pandemic made many people aware of what they depend on. I think I used to ask my students before the pandemic just a kind of mind game. Let's suppose tomorrow, I told them, oil prices went multiplied by 10, 20, 100. Not completely unreasonable hypothesis. So that would make moving from one place to another, at least on a larger scale, something like a huge rupture. Right? Where would you go if you knew it in advance? Where would you go? Where would you locate on the chessboard of the world? Where would you go? So some immediately said, "Oh, at least in the city, at least you have conversation, you get new people, stuck." But then, of course, very rapidly they said, remember, oil multiplied by 100, that means that the food is not going to become that easily, that it's actually becoming super expensive, etc., etc. So in a way, the pandemic, for another reason, made people aware of, it kind of reduce their world very drastically at some point. It made very evident the link of dependencies, all the things that we discussed, food, health, the nets, or things like that. Ça dénudé, it kind of a clear iron wire that builds your environment. And many people, those who had a choice to plan it, managed to leave very, very, very soon, and to those who had the choice for money, those kind of stuff. So, in the middle class, it made, I think, more people aware of the fact that their world could be limited by something. So here it was a strategy against COVID, but it could be oil, it could be other stuff.
But I think it's a very interesting issue about these terms: incorporation, infiltration, integration, secession. On the one hand, you said it's a matter of who has the choice. I think so. It's a financial choice. It's a choice also of social position. Also, but and also a matter of geographical location. So I don't know if without deep enough today understand these four terms also in their differentiation according to different fields of being set upon. But I think it's important to make the difference between the ones who can embrace secession or not, and which are the fields of influence doing or working on that. And maybe to make it also to put it into an imagery which came to mind a few times in the last semester. I had a lot of students asking me, well, I want to become an architect, but I don't want to build. And I don't know if it's too logical almost to speak about our métier as architects in this way, but I think it's also a question that is set in this part of the world and in this type of education that we enjoy. So, maybe a last reflection before we open the field to questions from the public on a differentiation between these terms according to maybe fields of influence or fields of influence on the world.
I mean, it's not exactly the first generation of students who want to be architect and not build. I remember Léon Trier saying, like 40 years ago, I'm an architect, therefore I don't build. I'm a real one. So, but those students today, I think they are expressing something which is not just not a fantasy, coquetry. They don't want to produce. They don't want to be producers in the sense of creators. They are not into that metaphysics where you bring something to create. They are not in that metaphysics. They want to take care about things. They want to educate, maybe bring or guide environments, and I think we should all be like that in some ways.
It's best bridge to ask the students. Do you already have maybe questions on Sébastien Marot and the evening?
Questions from students?
And not only for students.
No. Well,
if not, we can call it a night, and also maybe reflect on the way we can make a last bondage to also our first guest last week. Marc-Angélie was speaking about the integration of technology in architecture and the lessons learned during the past 30 years. Lessons which ended also in the transformation of a ranch project, which he last used to illustrate a view on architecture and technology, and naming as the most important room in the ranch the workshop. The workshop as the place where you repair things, you repair them. I'm thinking also technology in architecture, just the way you think the lesson of agriculture on architecture, the lesson of care.
I think it's a very important thing that I described with Colin Moore's three principles. They were not absolutely focused on architecture, but of course he's an architect, and he expressed them as an architect. I have no problem, in a way, with functionalism, with the horrible critics that postmodernism, they rain critics on functionalism because architecture is not much more than that, etc. I do think they have a point with functionalism. The problem is that they have not the good model of function, I think. And that I do think that taking the ecosystem or certain view of residents instead of the machine would bring a much more interesting this other functionalism, where each element fulfills several functions and each function is fulfilled by several elements. That's something.
Thank you for this last lesson, which we take as a tool. We are searching for tools, as we learned last week, not for tools of the Anthropocän, but tools to deal with the consequences of. Thank you again for listening to this very rich lecture, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks again for the lecture of Space Caviar in the Zooms. Sébastien Marot again talk. Thank you.
Thank you.